You are now listening to Troubles a Bruin, the Boston Bruins podcast that we are happy that you are listening to. I don't have a particularly clever intro today.
Excellent intro.
Yes, that was far and away my best intro thus far. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I am Joseph Oakes. I am joined, as always, by my colleague, Brandon Scher Cohen. How the hell are you, Brandon?
I'm doing well. It's been a few days. Last time we talked, we were speaking with a professional hockey player. So now it's just your two boring podcast hosts.
Just us two idiots pretending like we know what we're talking about as it pertains to hockey. It's episode 13 today, lucky 13 or unlucky 13, depending on your viewpoint on the matter. Brandon, you're a fan of the number 13, correct?
I am a fan of the number 13.
You are a contrarian like that. That does make a lot of sense.
I guess it does, actually.
It's the Kenny Linsman episode today, 13.
There you go.
You would know that. You weren't born yet.
I wasn't born yet.
I don't know. Enough preamble, man. Let's talk about the Bruins, shall we?
Yeah. What do you want to start with today?
Let's do it with a little trade deadline talk. Why not, huh? It is officially the month of February. It's trade deadline month. Things are going to start heating up any day now. Why don't we take a little glimpse into some potential Boston Bruins plans here?
Yeah, I mean, trade deadline's always most people's favorite time of year, right? You've got teams
it's exciting. It's like Christmas.
Yeah, you've got teams that are buying, teams that are selling, teams that are right in the middle. So that's where teams have to kind of figure out, are they buyers, are they sellers? What are they doing? Are they going to stand pat and hope that they can, I guess, internally promote, or are they strong enough to go for a run? What happens? So that leads us to, what are the Bruins going to do at the deadline?
Yeah, well, in each of the previous 3 years, the Bruins found themselves in that latter group, that group of, are we buyers, are we sellers, what are we going to do? You know, 1 year in an effort to try to sneak into the playoffs, they gave up 4 early to mid-round draft picks to bring in Lee Stempniak and John Michael Lyles, and it backfired. And then last year they waited until the 24th hour to snag Drew Stafford for a song away from the Winnipeg Jets. Stafford played well down the stretch and into the playoffs for the Bruins, but wasn't really that high impact deadline addition. And now this year, the Bruins, obviously they have depth with Anders Bjork and Peter Cehlarik both playing in Providence when the team is fully healthy and clicking on all cylinders. But now Bjork is hurt, and Cehlarik came up for a one-game stint. It's just been announced that he just got sent back down to Providence. What's your take? I mean, what do you think? Assuming that the chips fall in the Bruins' favor, assuming that there's no over expense to bring in a particular player. I mean, what is your ideal trade deadline scenario for the Bruins?
I mean, like you said, the Bruins haven't really been flashy in recent years. They haven't made the huge splash. But at the same time, this team hasn't been a legitimate contender in recent years, right? They've been kind of middle of the pack, fighting for a playoff spot. They missed it twice by a point. Last day of the season, they couldn't get in. But if you're that close to missing it and getting in, then you're probably not a legitimate contender in the first place. Nashville wasn't exactly a bad 8th seed team. They were just an 8th seeded team. The Bruins would have been a very questionable 8th seeded team, regardless of who was on the team, regardless of who was healthy. You're talking about just a world of difference between last year and the year before, right? Last year the team had some talent, and even between last year and this year, it's night and day. So this year, you have a legitimate chance to win the Stanley Cup. Do you go all in? Do you start looking at all those prospects and picks that you have and think, you know what? We can part with some of these to try and get an impact player now, whether it be a deadline addition, like a true deadline addition where they're expiring, or a player like, I don't know, last year we heard about Gabriel Landeskog, for example. I'm not saying he would be an option this year, but I'm saying a player that has term that could be an option. So I don't know where I stand on it. I'm still kind of thinking I don't want to trade now. And luckily, there's a few weeks before we actually have to see a decision made. But the longer you wait, the fewer options are going to be out there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I certainly have had a little bit of a change of heart recently. Not a significant one, but the more I thought about it, the more I came to the conclusion that, the future is uncertain, right?
Yeah.
And it's easy to look at the way that the Bruins are currently constructed, both on their current roster and their very prodigious pipeline. They made 11 selections in the first 2 rounds over the last 3 drafts. I mean, that's a lot of top 60 picks that they've brought into the organization. It's easy, looking at that. I think it's really easy to say, like, oh, well, don't do too much this year. Like, our best days are still ahead of us. And I think for the most part, that's still true. At least on paper, the better days still lie ahead for the Bruins. But at the same time, you take a look at a team like Ottawa. They've got the 3rd worst record in the NHL this year. Last year, they were 1 overtime goal away from going to the Stanley Cup Finals. And they really haven't seen, like, a ton of roster turnover. This isn't a team that made it super close and then was just absolutely gutted by free agency. For the most part, everybody that they lost has been replaced, It's not like this team got significantly worse on paper over the course of 2 seasons, but last year they had the mojo. Everything was falling in their favor. And this year, not so much. And I think that it would be a mistake. I'm not advocating for a really high price rental. I don't think the Bruins have any interest in guys like Evander Kane. I don't think they should have any interest in guys like that.
Absolutely not.
No,
especially not that guy.
No, because you're going to need to overpay to get those guys, and I don't want the Bruins.
And he's not that good. He hasn't been that good this season.
He's a good player, but considering the fact that it's probably going to take a 1st-round pick, a 2nd-round pick, and a prospect to bring him in, that's
probably a roster player.
That might be a pipe dream on Buffalo's part, but it's at least going to take a couple high-priced assets to get him, and I don't think he's worth it. I don't think that even if he were worth it, it would behoove the Bruins to spend that much.
No.
Having said that, I do think that they should spend more than they did last year. With all of the picks that they've made over the last 3 seasons, the pipeline is chock full. Now, obviously, you can never have too many, but look where the Bruins are this year. The Bruins have the 3rd best record in the NHL. They've got the best line in the NHL. They've got 7 legitimate NHL defensemen. Tuukka Rask is playing his best hockey in the last 4 years.
He's a Vezina Trophy candidate, right? Like, for sure.
Absolutely. And they've got 4 really solid forward lines that they can roll and just throw at the opposition shift after shift. This is the kind of team that you buy in on. They have shown enough, in my opinion, over the last couple months to suggest that this is a legitimate contender. And though this team shouldn't go full buyer mode and just throw caution to the wind and start throwing picks and prospects around to bring in just an assortment of rentals, this team has absolutely shown that it deserves 1, if not 2, additions to the roster to bolster things and strengthen things. Injuries are going to happen. Suspensions happen. Look what happened to the Bruins in a span of 10 days. Brad Marchand, Charlie McAvoy, Noel Acciari, and Anders Bjork all went down hurt, and David Backes almost got concussed and knocked out of a game.
I'm shocked he wasn't, to be honest.
I am too. But so things can change immediately. And to just say, like, oh no, it's not about this year, and we got to make sure that our prospects and our young players get as much playing time as possible throughout the duration of the season. I think turning a blind eye to how good this Bruins team is and how legitimate their bid for the Stanley Cup appears that it will be, I think the Bruins should do more than just, subtly augment their bottom 6.
Yeah, so I want to kind of dissect a few things you said there. So before I even go into that, looking at like a player like Evander Kane, he's a good example of a player you shouldn't just look at the entire stat line and think you have the full story. Because while the stat line looks decent, because he had an incredible start to the season. He scored 4 goals in his last 30 games, and he's on an 11-game goalless drought which is almost one calendar month at this point. So don't look at the full, stat line. I think you see the full picture. You got to look deeper into it. It's also not just about points. But I'm on the fence with trading away the prospects, and this is where I stand. And it's a weird kind of, I guess, intersection because I see the problem with it, but it's hard to part ways. I love players like Zaboral and Lausanne and Vakanainen and Lindgren and all these players, Solaric. I'm a big fan of them all. But I also have been huge in saying that I don't think you can keep all of these players just given, logistics of it. You don't have enough spots for
you won't be able to play all these players.
If you have 4 left-handed defensemen that can play a top 4 role potentially in the next few years, if you have 2 spots, that leaves 2 people out. Even if you fill 3 spots, now you still have 1 person left out. You have Krug that would be out of the mix, which again, I think in a few years he would be expendable for extra assets. But you're still taking him out of the equation. You have too many prospects to play down the line. The question there becomes which ones do you part ways with and which ones do you invest in long term?
That's the tough part, figuring out which ones have the best chance of succeeding. Yeah.
Right, and that's where it becomes difficult. I don't want to see any of these prospects traded, but at the same time, they're going to have to be traded, right? Unless some of these players can play on the right side.
Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt, but I mean, they don't even have to trade these guys. I mean, the Bruins have a full slate of draft picks this year. The Bruins don't have to actually, subtract from any of their pipeline right now if they keep it, exclusively to futures. Maybe a B prospect here or there, but I mean, I think, Don Sweeney was on record as saying, Elliot Friedman, rather, reported that the Bruins aren't parting with their top prospects. Teams have
that
acquired
includes
about
guys
Frederick.
Like Trent Frederick.
Teams have acquired. Yeah, exactly. And
McAvoy,
the Bruins have
Carlo.
said no dice. But that doesn't mean that future draft picks couldn't possibly be in play. And again, considering the fact that the Bruins made 22 selections over the last 3 years and 11 of them came in the first 2 rounds, I think you can justify subtracting a first or a second round pick here or there at this point.
My only issue with that is I would not trade away a first or a second in the 2018 draft because this draft is so deep. I was supposed to have a draft ranking out in January. That was my goal, but I'm pushing it to February just because it's so hard to evaluate which talent is better than which talent for this draft because they're so good. Last year was difficult because there's a lot of players on the same talent level, so it was really who you have where. This year, it's very deep. Going into the second round, you have a very deep draft class, and I think a lot of teams are going to be very happy, and a lot of teams are going to be very upset that they're going to have to pass on certain players to get the player they want. Which, on that note, if you think Don Sweeney isn't a little upset that he had to pass on Barzal to go with his own player, of course he is, but he made his decision. That's it, right? So
yeah, please stop talking about that.
Like 20 know what they do.
Yeah, it was 24 or 25 GMs passed on David Pastrnak.
Right.
Ray Bourque wasn't the first overall pick in his draft. Michael Jordan wasn't the first overall pick in his draft. Like, these things happen, It happens.
Also, a GM isn't just evaluating a person based on talent. They're evaluating based on fit in the system, based off of the way, they had meetings with these players. They know how they are. Combine results, which I wouldn't put too much weight into for the NHL, but it's still there. There's multiple factors that go into it. If they spoke to a player and they thought, you know what, this guy doesn't really gel with what we're looking for the future, then they don't draft him. Or if there was 3 players that thought, you know what, I can't pass on these guys, they're going to go with them. So when you're talking about a draft
or maybe they just made a mistake.
That's also a possibility. It's an imperfect science.
Yeah, come on. Like, what is that? This is the first time that anybody has ever been drafted after where they should have been drafted. Like, a little revisionist history has never cleared anything up before.
Right. Gruden just got hired to 10 years, $100 million by the Raiders. He picked
that'll go well.
He picked a punter and a kicker over Tom Brady in the 2000 draft, right? And I'm not saying that it wasn't the right pick at the time because both went on to have good careers, I would say, but they're not Tom Brady. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about 2 of the best of their position for a long time. But they're no Tom Brady, and that's obviously no one's Tom Brady. But it happens. It was a 6th-round pick,
Everybody get over it. Zachary Senyshyn's 21 years old. Like, relax. There's plenty of time. Jake DeBrusk didn't light the world on fire in his first year in Providence either.
Well, that's
there's
another
time.
thing.
Everybody relax.
If a player is known to score in juniors or wherever, DeBrusk is a goal scorer. When he went back to the WHL, his job wasn't to score goals anymore. His job from a Bruin standpoint, was to work on his two-way game. You look at DeBrusk, I don't think he's a liability out there. You look at Senyshyn, everyone knows what he can do on the ice. The fact that he isn't playing a top six role is just indicative of what they want him to do. They want him to benefit in certain areas. They want him to work on certain areas. They know he can score. They know he can be a very physical forechecker. And he's still going to do that, but that's not what they're focusing on.
And he has plenty of time to develop. I mean, on a positive note, you're looking at the success that so many of the Bruins rookies are having at this point. That's only going to increase their dollar value on each subsequent contract of theirs. It might be nice if Zachary Senyshyn needs an extra year or two to mature on the farm to make sure that that's not yet another rookie that's bending you over the barrel and kind of jacking up his own price with his excellent play. So
I think it's that almost every day.
There's a silver lining to everything, Some of these Bruins prospects are going to have to take a little while to develop. Otherwise, the Bruins are going to be up Schitt's Creek in about 3 years.
So just to go back to the trade deadline.
Yeah, because I have my idea of who I'd like the Bruins to go after, but I'd like to hear yours first.
I don't know that I have a specific player. Ryan McDonagh would be my ideal player, first of all. That's the one name I can think of that I would love to bring in. Obviously, it would have to probably involve someone like Krug going the other way, I would assume.
That'd be a big get.
Or you move Krug down to the bottom six, but then you have so many NHL defensemen. I don't know what the situation would be. It would have to be a weird trade.
I can't, for some reason, I can't call this to mind. Is McDonagh a lefty?
Yes.
I thought he was a righty. Okay.
Now
I'm probably wrong. I'm not like I'm not like some people who just know everyone's
handedness is a little tougher. I know a lot of players, and there's some players I think I know, and I'm like, oh, actually, yeah, he's a left-handed. Okay,
he is. Okay.
See, there's certain players I shock myself with. He's one of them that I'm like, okay, I think I know. So he would be an ideal top four defense. I mean, a really good top four defenseman. He's a top two defenseman legitimately in the league. So
for sure.
Just to go back to you're talking about trading future picks away. I wouldn't want to trade away 2018 first or second. A second, I could be a little more convinced. A first, I wouldn't want to, even if it's a late first-round pick, which, by all accounts, it should be between 20 and 31. Probably even lower than that, right? 25 and 31 could be a possibility. So you're talking about... It's a risk. The end of the first round isn't a guaranteed... No spot in the first round or any draft is a guaranteed successful pick. But as you go further into the draft, including into the first round, the success rate goes significantly
down. I wrote about that a couple months ago, and actually looked into the numbers, the success rate, the average anticipated NHL career, how many games played, and it was a lot lower than I thought it would be. Even though it was in the back end of the first round, it's still the first round, but.
It's also a matter of what teams are looking for at that point. Are they looking for the safe pick? Are they looking for the high ceiling pick that might not pan out? It depends what you're looking for.
Are you looking for David Pastrnak, or are you looking for Trent Frederick?
Are you looking for Trent Frederick, or are you looking for Alex DeBrincat?
Yeah, exactly.
Which both are obviously looking like very good picks, but I still would have taken DeBrincat just because at the time, who didn't see what was coming? I mean, everyone knew it was coming. But in terms of addition, Ryan McDonagh makes a lot of sense to me. I think the defense is good. I think the defense could be great with McDonagh. And let's say you don't move Krug. Let's say you move Krug to the third pairing. Now he's really in his element. Because now he gets sheltered minutes. He gets offensive zone starts. He gets a lot more not more power play time, but his ice time is going to come from the power play more than it is 5-on-5. And I think that's the best case scenario for the Bruins. Nothing against Krug. I think he's fine defensively. I don't think he's good defensively. I think
ideally you're giving him... I even hesitate to use bottom pairing. Ideally, you are putting him in a role where he is getting nothing but offensive zone starts.
Yeah, it's hard to say bottom pairing or we know who the fourth line is on the Bruins. But
Kevin Shattenkirk isn't a bottom pairing defenseman, but he winds up playing there a lot because his skill set is geared toward the offensive side of things.
Mike Green would be another example of a player like that.
Exactly.
Right? You're talking about players that are offensive, so they're better suited on a bottom pairing where they're not asked to go up against the top talent of other teams. Not because they're a bad defender, but because you can utilize them in a certain way.
Contribute offensively, yeah.
Exactly. They're a guy like Charlie McAvoy is a legitimate two-way defender. Oliver Ekman-Larsson is a two-way defenseman. Those guys can play against top four. Hedman.
Would we say that about Oliver Ekman-Larsson?
100%.
I think Oliver Ekman-Larsson's. I think the defensive side of his game is a little exaggerated. I don't think that he's a one-dimensional defenseman by any means. I would call him a two-way defenseman. And I know that he's played on pretty much nothing but garbage teams out in the desert.
That's my issue with it.
But he's what is he, like a minus 36 right now? And I know that plus minus is a flawed statistic, but I guarantee that Zdeno Chara wouldn't be a minus 36 out there.
But even a guy like Nicholas Hjalmarsson's looking really rough, and that's a guy who is a legitimate top four.
I understand, and it's not his situation isn't doing him any favors out there. But I've seen Oliver Ekman-Larsson get roasted with some fair regularity. I think he's a very, very good defenseman. I think the offensive side of his game is a lot more polished than the defensive. But that's neither here nor there. I'm here to split hairs with you.
We would have to see it more. Like if he got traded from the desert, how would he do with an actual team?
Yeah, let's see how he can do on a playoff team with a good partner.
Right.
So
there's no way to solve the argument.
How many years are left on McDonough's contract?
I think it's actually a decent contract. It might be.
Let's look this up because I've got a hypothetical for you regarding a trade package for Ryan McDonough.
Okay, I'll let you know. I'm pretty sure it's he's got this year and next year.
Oh, that's it?
Yeah.
I thought maybe he had an extra year attached onto that.
I thought he might as well. I was torn between next year or the year after being his last year.
I was going to ask you if he had an extra year. I was going to ask you if you would send Carlo the other way.
Ooh.
Would you trade Brandon Carlo if it meant that you could get McDonough for a playoff run and then 2 subsequent seasons? One season, I think I know Carlo has had a little bit of a sophomore slump this year, but I also think that he still has a pretty bright future as a very solid second pairing defenseman.
I wouldn't do it, obviously not with a 1 year. With a 2, I'd be a little more hesitant, but I still don't think I would do it because even though there's been some glaring mistakes in Carlo's game, I think in general he's been very underrated. Like he's looked really good, he's been smooth, he's made good decisions,
I agree.
He's logged big minutes. I think it's been overstated how bad he is when he actually hasn't been bad.
He's had the misfortune of being compared against a complete anomaly in Charlie McAvoy.
That's the issue, right? You're talking about last year. He's the one rookie on the team. You're like, wow, this guy's incredible.
Hey, he was 19 when the season started, locked down a spot in the top 4. I mean, he was great. Spent most of the year on the team's top pairing. I mean, nobody batted an eye. There were mistakes here and there, but people were a lot more forgiving. But here comes this McAvoy kid who just does everything as a 20-year-old, already arguably the team's best defenseman. And And now all of a sudden, every time, Brandon Carlo whiffs on a clearance or, catches a divot in the shoddy Barclays Center ice and takes
2
a
times,
spill.
Right? Like it's 2 times in the same arena.
Yeah, everybody's ready to send him down to the ECHL. I think Brandon Carlo's best attribute as a defenseman is that you don't notice him very often. When you're not noticing a forward very often, that's usually a bad thing. And when you're not noticing a defenseman very often, that's usually a good thing. It's like a shutdown. Yeah, it's like a shutdown corner in the NFL.
Exactly.
When you don't say Darrelle Revis's name at all for the entire game, it's not because he's been bad. It's because they're just not even throwing to his side of the field.
Exactly. You're talking about Richard Sherman. The whole right side of the field is locked down. No one throws there. You can't have 10 interceptions in a season because people don't know how to throw to you. Marcus Peters is another example.
When Carlo's just using an active stick and disrupting plays at his own blue line and clearing the puck out of the zone cleanly and just keeping a clean sheet in front of his netminder, that's his game. He's not Charlie McAvoy. He's never going to be Charlie McAvoy. He's not Dougie Hamilton. He's never going to be Dougie Hamilton. Brandon Carlo's game is centered around at least the back half of the ice.
Think about this. You can think of like the 2 or 3 specific examples of Carlo making a mistake or having bad luck and it leading to a goal. The fact that you can only think of 2 or 3 is incredible. That's the only time you can actually think of Brandon Carlo. How often do you see Brandon Carlo on the ice?
He's 21 years old.
You don't notice a shutdown defender because they're doing their job perfectly. If they're doing their job well, the puck is moving the other way and it's back in the hands of the offensive players immediately.
Exactly.
Or it's Torrey Krug's hands.
Has he been excellent this year? No, he hasn't been excellent this year. Has he been a hell of a lot better than anyone's giving him credit for? Yeah, absolutely. He's been a solid part of the team. Boston's got one of the best penalty kills in the NHL, and he's got the second or third most minutes of any Bruins skater on the PK.
Yeah,
he's
right.
He's a big part of one of the Bruins' biggest team strengths. So the fact that he's not, taking your breath away with end-to-end rushes doesn't mean he's not doing his job.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far into Matt Grzelcyk, but I think the offense hasn't been there. But man, he's been good.
He's solid. He's steady. He knows when to pinch and when to retreat. He makes smart plays. He makes excellent clearances. If he can hit you with an outlet pass, he's going to hit you. And if he can't, he's not going to force it. He's going to make the safe play, clear the zone, make the other team regroup.
I think he has top 4 defenseman ceiling. Right? I think he can be there. I don't know that he'll be there soon. And with the Bruins system, with the current prospect pool, it's hard to get there. But I think other teams, he's an interesting option if the Bruins decide, we can't fit this guy on our team because of all the prospects. Grzelcyk could actually be a pretty good addition for another team. And
or at the same time, Grzelcyk could be because he is a Boston kid and his dad's worked there. I remember a couple of years ago, the Bruins, Don Sweeney and Cam Neely making a big deal out of making sure that they had guys on their team that wanted to be there. Remember that?
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to look at it, too.
Nobody wants to be there more than Matt Grzelcyk,
Yeah, hometown kid, guy played there for college.
Hometown kid whose dad's worked in the building, whose dad worked at the previous building. He's worked for the team for so long. He grew up at the Garden. He grew up a Bruins fan. Nobody wants to be there more than Matt Grzelcyk. And he may be a good second-pairing defenseman. He may never be more than a great bottom-pairing defenseman.
Which is fine by itself.
But he's already a great bottom-pairing defenseman, and I don't think anybody anticipated him being one, at least not this soon. And Matt Grzelcyk, at the very least, might wind up being excellent justification for the Bruins to maybe let one of those 4 left-handed defensive prospects go elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree with that. And when I said he might be a good fit for another team, I only meant if the Bruins decide they don't need him. I love Grzelcyk. I've been on Grzelcyk's bandwagon since before we even started the podcast.
I thought when you said you were on his, I thought you were going a different direction than bandwagon. But I'm glad you saved it with bandwagon. So we'll see. Now, as far as guys that I'd like to see in Boston, I have very recently talked myself into Michael Grabner. I love the particulars that he would bring. First of all, he's got 21 goals right now. He's got as many goals as Brad Marchand and Patrice Bergeron. He's got more goals than David Pastrnak, Patrick Kane, Anze Kopitar, Jamie Benn. He's having an incredible year. He's on pace for 35 goals. He scored 27 goals last year. He has some of the most incredible speed in the NHL. There are very few guys in the NHL who can hang with Grabner in the speed department, and that would enable the Bruins to continue playing this kind of newfound up-tempo attacking style that they employ under Bruce Cassidy. I think he'd fit in like a glove. He gets paid less than $2 million on the remainder of his contract. He kills penalties. He is an excellent addition to one of Boston's middle 6 lines. He can play either wing. It looks like this is a perfect deadline addition for these Bruins, who probably don't want to spend Evander Kane, Mike Hoffman, James Van Riemsdyk prices, but also owe it to themselves and to their team to spend more than they did last year for Drew Stafford. Michael Grabner seems like the perfect middle ground for me, and I would be very excited to hear that they had brought him into the fold.
Well, that's actually funny then. We were both looking at Rangers, so that could be a bigger deal than we even anticipated if it involves both of them. But even if it just involves Grabner, he's also a name I've been looking at because ideally the Bruins don't want to bring in a top 6 price forward, but they want to bring in a forward who can play third-line minutes and can move up the lineup if needed, if there's an injury, if someone can't play. The Bruins right now are showing they have depth to play regardless of who gets hurt or not, and there's a lot of room to wiggle with. But
I'll tell you what, at this point, I mean, even cost aside, let's assume the Rangers decide that they'll eat the majority of the contract and make it comparable. I'd rather the Bruins bring in Michael Grabner than Rick Nash right now.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Even if they were coming in at the same price, at the same cap hit, I would rather the Bruins went for Grabner than Rick Nash.
And Rick Nash is like the prototypical power forward. I've always seen him as like an ideal fit for the Bruins. Not someone I would want on the Bruins, but just like this typical Bruins style of play. He's on pace for another 20-goal season, which is impressive. But I think Grabner brings more to the team in terms of... Because Rick Nash is pretty one-dimensional at this point in his career, right? He's going to skate up the ice. He's going to try and score a goal. He's going to use his size to get through you. He's not going to back-check as hard as Grabner will. He's not going to play penalty kill minutes. He's not going to be better suited on a third line than he is on a first line. And I don't want to put him on a first or second line and then disrupt what we already have going there.
Yeah, I agree completely. I've seen a lot of people in the argument against, making a deadline edition as being like, well, who sits? ? Well then who do you take out of the lineup? And yeah, it does raise a question. Who do you take out of the lineup? But I will say a couple things to that. One, guys are going to get hurt.
Yeah.
Guys will get hurt. Like, the Bruins are going to need no less than 13, probably 14 forwards if they have any hopes of making a deep playoff run. They might even need 15. Who knows? But they're going to need more than 12. So I'm not going to shed a tear because somebody in Boston's top 12 loses a spot right now. But you take a look at, the 2011 Bruins. Tyler Seguin sat for 12 or 13 of the team's 25 playoff games. You take a look at the 2013 Bruins. Dougie Hamilton sat for all but 7 of the team's 22 playoff games in that year's run to the Cup Finals. More often than not, it's a young player who winds up, getting nudged out and grabbing some pine. And I don't think that's a bad thing. If you've got too many good players to ice at one time, then why not ice the 12 most capable playoff-ready players you have? I love the job that Sean Corrali does. I really do. I love the job that Sean Corrali does. But Sean Corrali, even though it's not his primary job, Sean Corrali, I think, has 2 points in his last 30 games.
Right.
I love what he brings. But at the same time, the Bruins' fourth line would be just fine if the team moved Riley Nash down to the fourth line and slid a deadline addition onto the third line.
Yeah, and don't forget, both Danton Heinen and David Backes can play center. And Ryan Spooner can still play center. So you have options on the third line if you need to move a guy like Nash down.
You want to move some guys around. You want to get Grabner up with Krejci. You want to move Spooner down and have him center the third line, but he'd still have Backes to his right, which means he'd have help in the face-off department. I mean, putting the carriage before the horse and saying we can't trade for anybody who will make our team better because I'm worried about our rookies and their feelings. These guys have already gotten more playing time than they should have for all intents and purposes this year. You know what I mean? The amount of rookies who have played a full season of games so far in Boston, these guys are 20 and 21 years old. They've already gotten excellent playing time. Nobody is going to sit and sulk if they get bumped out of the starting lineup for half the games in the playoffs.
Also, no one's looking at Grabner on a one-year contract and thinking, oh no, he's taking my spot. Look, at this point of the year, it's not about, or not this point, but at that time, you're talking about May and June, you're not looking at hurt feelings. You're looking at, hey, we need to put the best team on the ice to win a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, I'm looking at hardware.
It's easy to say, well, this team, we're built for the future. We're built for the present and the future. You can't just keep looking forward, because then at that point, you're always going to look to the future.
You're always looking toward the future. Sometimes you have to cash in. Sometimes you have to go all in and say, or not all in, but sometimes you got to play a hand. And the Bruins have the third best record in the NHL right now. If you don't play a hand when things are going this well, when are you going to try to win a Stanley Cup? What happens next year if all of a sudden Father Time catches up to Zdeno Chara? He shows up next year and just, that was the year,
Or Bergeron or Krejci or Rask. You're talking about the prime of the career for and even Marchand is not getting any younger.
What if one of those guys? What if Bergeron gets his fourth career concussion? What if Brad Marchand tears his ACL? What if Charlie McAvoy needs a follow-up procedure on his heart? Kicking the can down the road every year and saying like, "Oh, we're still built for the future." Eventually, you are going to pass up an opportunity to win the Stanley Cup, and I think this year is that year for the Bruins
because they have so much to work with, like in terms of trade assets. They have so much they can work with. They have a team that looks ready to win. You don't want to bring in something that's going to disrupt what they've already got going. Even if Grabner is brought in and he plays a less significant role than you're hoping for, at least he's there if you need him to play a bigger role.
The Bruins, it would be a shame if this team's chances were felled because the Bruins didn't account for the inevitable injuries that are going to take place during the playoffs. If everybody who was naysaying the idea of bringing someone into this year's team, if all of those people had their druthers and this Bruins team dressed these 13 forwards for the playoffs, there's a very good chance that an injury or two would keep this team short of where it wants to be. I think they're good on the back end. I think I wouldn't hate it if the Bruins went for an upgrade at eighth defenseman over Paul Postma. I don't think that's a bad spot for a guy like Postma to be, but more often than not, teams that make deep playoff runs go 8 defensemen deep at some point, and I don't know how many people have a ton of confidence in Paul Postma in a playoff game. Do you?
Well, no, and it's another thing, too. No one really talks about Rob O'Gara or Paul Postma. Like, are their feelings hurt because they've just been sitting in the press box all season? It sucks for them. It really does. But can you really fault the team for not? Even when McQuaid was sat, you're still getting paid, right? And the team can't focus on your feelings right now.
No,
they've got to focus on, hey, we had an 18-game point streak. Hey, we lost the game because we had a million odds stacked against us. Now we're on a new hopeful winning streak. It's one game, but hopefully that builds to a new streak. You can't think about the players that aren't playing.
Yeah, I think, obviously all of these guys want to be playing. There isn't anybody in the NHL who would rather be in the press box than on the ice, right?
Yeah.
All these guys want to be playing. But two things. One, I think the idea of hurt feelings gets overblown, especially in the NHL, where guys seem to have a more team-oriented outlook than in some of the other professional sports. So I'm sure that it's disappointing, but they understand.
They're also not just being sat, like they're getting spoken to by the coaches. I'm sure Don Sweeney has spoken to them.
Sure.
Bruce Cassidy has spoken to them.
And let's say it does upset them, right? Let's say that one of these guys is like, fuck this. I should be playing. This is bullshit. I'm better than that guy. I'm glad that guy is sitting, and I hope he continues to sit, and I hope he continues to get angrier and angrier, because that kind of mindset is going to come out eventually regarding something. If it's not playing time now, it's playing time in the future, or it's role in the future, or it's ice time in the future. That kind of mindset is indicative of a larger problem, and I don't mind that kind of mindset being outed earlier in a player's career, so the team can hypothetically move on from them and replace them with somebody who doesn't take such a selfish outlook to the team's needs.
Looking at some guy in the KHL right now, right? Alex Koklachev.
Koklachev.
So that's a good. I think we've both given our opinion on deadline additions. I want to just quickly touch on Peter Cehlarik, if that's cool with you.
Because he has, as of about an hour ago, we are recording on Friday. It has been announced that he has been sent back down to Providence.
He had to be sent down to Providence because he was an emergency recall.
Exactly.
There's no choice. He had to be sent down. Also, he wasn't playing in a situation that was great for him. His best option is to play next to Krejci on the second line. Right now, the Bruins couldn't do that, so he ended up playing on the third line instead, and that's not ideal for him. His game isn't made to play the style of game that Heinen played with Nash and Bacchus. His style
they're completely different players, Danton Heinen and Peter Cehlarik.
Yeah, Peter Cehlarik is... they're both very good two-way players, I would say, but I think Danton Heinen has more of a grinder attitude to him than Cehlarik, who seems like he's just more of a skilled player, He's a player that's skilled, he's very good in his own zone, he knows how to play the game.
I wouldn't say he's very good in his own zone. He's for
his age and experience.
For his age, I think Cehlarik has a solid grasp on defensive responsibilities.
Right.
Sure.
No one's comparing him to Brad Marchand as a winger.
No.
I'm just saying he for his age and for his experience level, I think he's ahead of Bjork, for example, in his own zone.
I got to be honest with you about something. I kind of don't understand the Peter Cehlarik love fest. I think that Peter Cehlarik, I understand why people look at a guy like him and say, like, oh, I think he could absolutely develop into a very good player. I don't disagree with that at all. He's got good size. He's 6'2", 200 pounds. He's not a physical guy, but he uses his frame well. He's skilled with the puck. I think Peter Cehlarik could absolutely develop into a very good, middle six winger. But the fervor with which I've seen some people advocate for his call up or for his ice time, I wonder what they have seen that would suggest that he deserves that ice time over some of the other guys who are in Boston. Like, do they think that he deserves the ice time over Heinen or Bjork?
I think their issue is the fact that Vetrano was still there.
Oh, and that's another thing that I understand that. I think Frank Vetrano is a square peg in a round hole right now. He's not producing enough to justify playing in the top 9, but I think he's miscast as a fourth-line energy player. So I understand that, but I also understand how waivers works.
Exactly, that's an issue.
I also understand that that 30 teams are going to get a crack at Frank Vetrano for free if the Bruins decide to go with Cehlarik instead of Vetrano. So that is what it is. I'm sure the Bruins would rather have Peter Cehlarik as their 13th forward than Frank Vetrano too, but not at the risk of losing Vetrano for nothing.
And even then, you can't. People are saying, "Well, just trade Vetrano." One, another team has to have interest in him to trade one of their assets. Two, why would you trade a player that has literally zero value right now? Like, he has zero value, if not negative value at this point. So why would you trade away a player just to get rid of him? If you can keep him on your roster, there's no reason not to. You're not paying his contract, so who cares if he just sits there?
Yeah, exactly. I know a guy who would take Frank Vetrano.
Wait, who?
Guess. You can do it.
A GM?
A GM. Who would take Frank Vetrano?
Peter Chiarelli?
Peter Chiarelli would. Frank Vetrano was actually, the signing of Frank Vetrano was actually the last transaction, the last player personnel transaction that Peter Chiarelli made as GM of the Boston Bruins.
And I don't think it was a bad one. The guy showed he can play hockey
I don't
at
think
an
it was.
AHL level.
I don't think it was a bad one either. Frank Vetrano was the recipient of some bad timing as far as a career slump is concerned, coinciding with the meteoric rise of 3 excellent rookie forwards.
Yeah,
that's the nature of the beast sometimes.
I don't think Vetrano is a top 6 forward on the Boston Bruins. I don't think he'll be a top 6 forward elsewhere at this point just because of the way his career's gone. But if you look at Frank Vetrano and don't think he can be an NHL player potentially somewhere else, then you're letting the hate flow through you at that point.
Yeah.
You're not actually looking at the player. The player hasn't got an opportunity in Boston when the team's actually been good. And that's because the team's been good, so you can't take somebody else out of the spot.
I think Frank Vetrano could absolutely develop into an average, and I don't use that as a disparaging term, as an average third line winger.
Yeah, I think that's better than most people would describe him.
Yeah, I think that's Frank Vetrano's ceiling. Frank Vetrano's ceiling is a third line winger who's going to play on your second power play unit and score 15, 20 goals a year, and that's a good player. That's a useful guy in today's NHL. And I think, considering the fact that Edmonton's going nowhere fast this year, Frank Vetrano is a restricted free agent at season's end, so there is team control involved. And considering the fact that Edmonton's going to be looking to sell this year, I talked about it a couple weeks ago on the podcast. I would love to see a Frank Vetrano Mark Letestu swap. One for one. The Bruins bring in a guy who can play all 4 positions on your fourth line, have him serve as your 13th forward, as your utility playoff battle-tested forward who can win more than 50% of his faceoffs, play all 3 forward positions
on fourth or third line.
On your fourth or third line, depending on who's hurt and who's clicking. That's a trade that makes sense to me for both teams.
I think you would have to add to that trade as a Bruin, but it is Peter Chiarelli on the other side of the table, right? That's only because I'm talking about it's a Vetrano who his value is low. Like I said, it's virtually non-existent. For Letestu, who should have some interest as a deadline addition, I think maybe you have to add a low-end pick or something. Not much, but you'd have to probably add a little.
Throw in a 6th-round pick. You know, if Drew Stafford came over for a conditional 6th-round pick last year, then I don't think the Bruins should have to throw in more for Letestu than Frank Vatrano in a 6th-round pick, right? So anyway, I keep veering you off of the Cehlarik topic. My apologies.
Oh, no, I mean, it is what it is. I think Cehlarik, he had to be sent down. I think people that like him are justified in liking him. I think they like him a little too much, and I love him, and you love him. I know we both like him a lot. But I don't think he's a guy that should be getting NHL time right now if there's no spot for him in the lineup. Like, what do you... Yeah. He was non-existent in the game against the Blues just because he was put in a role he couldn't do well in. So what, are you going to just have him play in a role he can't play well in for the rest of his career?
Yeah, look, he'd be getting ice time in Buffalo. He'd be getting ice time in Arizona. He'd be getting ice time in a couple different places around the NHL. But right now, the team that owns his rights has the 3rd best record in the NHL, and they've got more NHL-ready forwards than they can ice at one time. So
look, I think, and this is probably a good place to end the episode, but I think if the biggest issue Bruins fans have right now is Peter Cehlarik being sent down, I think it's a good indicator.
Things are pretty damn good. Yeah,
things are going pretty well.
Well said. Yeah, nothing to complain about. And look, maybe Peter Cehlarik is a guy whose value you can cash in on as a trade chip. You know,
right? He's a guy that other teams should have a lot of interest in.
Look, with everybody that the Bruins have on roster right now, Heinen, Bjork, DeBrusk, all the guys they have in the pipeline who are a year or two away, Donato, Frederick, Senyshyn, Studnicka. I mean, this is another situation where it's like somebody's going to have to go. Not all of these guys are going to be Boston Bruins, and it's hard and it's scary to part with young players whom you see promise in. But the Bruins have the Stanley Cup in their sights this season, and they have the young roster and the pipeline that will make sure that they're not a one and done.
Yeah, and they're not gutting the system by trading away prospects.
No, they're not going anywhere.
Trade is probably going to be a good player, right? You look down the line, you're going to say, "Oh my God, they traded away this guy to get that player, and they didn't even win the cup." Yeah, but that's the price of business, you know.
And sometimes the guy that you trade away is Joe Colborne.
Right, exactly.
Sometimes the guy that you trade away is somebody that you selected in the middle of the first round, who winds up being nothing more than a 3rd-line plug.
Right.
You know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you come up snake eyes, and sometimes, you know, you hit a home run. It's an imperfect science, but I think that the Bruins would be doing their team a disservice by not buying in. And considering the fact that Cehlarik can't get ice time, and considering the fact that over the course of the last 2 years, he's shown that maybe he's a little injury prone. He certainly does seem to get banged up quite a bit. Maybe this is a good time to cash in on a guy's value.
I wouldn't say injury prone, but I agree. There's been some concern, so you don't want to find out he is injury prone if it comes to that point.
I wouldn't call him injury prone, but I have my eye on him. He's had a knee injury, he's had a shoulder injury, he's had this injury, he's had that injury. You know what I mean? Right. So it's like, it's hockey and it's a tough sport and guys get banged up, but you know, I think it bears watching.
And the Bruins know that as well. Like, they've been watching that. They know.
Yeah, if I know it, they know it.
All right. You think it's a good place to end the episode?
Yeah, let's wrap it up, man.
All right. So you can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, the Hockey Writers podcast page, Grandstand Sports Network, the best view in sports. Thank you for listening, everybody.
I've also started scribbling our IP and our website on bathroom stall walls around Los Angeles. So I'm hoping that we slowly but surely cultivate like a really hip underground following in Los Angeles. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, if you see it, you should also just scratch a check mark underneath so we know. Like,
take a picture, send it to us, you know. Do your part.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody.
Have a great day, everybody. Enjoy your weekend.